I want to thank Michael Wernick for his extraordinary service to Canada over many, many decades. We've accomplished a lot as a government over these past 3.5 years, and it was definitely in large part because of the extraordinary public service and Michael Wernick's leadership within that. He will be missed, but we look forward to working with Ian Shugart.
The SNC-Lavalin controversy has now cost the government 4 high-profile departures. Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott have both quit cabinet. Jerry Butts, the Prime Minister's former principal secretary, resigned. And today, Clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick, announced he's retiring. He's one of the officials Jody Wilson-Raybould accused of, quote, inappropriately pressuring her to intervene in the SNC-Lavalin criminal case. The CBC's Evan Dyer is with us for the latest. Hey, Evan, thanks for being with us. So tell us what Michael Wernick was saying today.
Well, Michael Wernick, of course, has been 38 years a public servant, so his departure was expected probably at some point this year, and that in itself doesn't come as a surprise. But he also made it very clear in his letter to the Prime Minister that this is not simply a normal end-of-career departure, and he did indeed link it back specifically to events around the SNC-Lavalin affair and that very contentious pair of appearances that he had at the Justice Committee of the Commons, where he sparred, you could say, with some of the opposition members, particularly the NDP's Charlie Angus, the Conservative Lisa Raitt, and also opened his first appearance with a statement that took many people by surprise and was subsequently criticised by some opposition members for what they called its partisan tone and its hyperbolic tone, as some of them described it. So today, in his letter, he began by referring back to those events. He said, "Recent events have led me to conclude that I cannot serve as Clerk of the Privy Council and Secretary to Cabinet during the upcoming election campaign." He went on to say, "It's now apparent that there's no path for me to have a relationship of mutual trust and respect with the leaders of the opposition parties." Interestingly, using the word mutual to suggest that not only does he feel that they've lost trust in him, but suggesting that he's also lost trust and respect in them. And he also went on to talk about election interference. And people who watched his first appearance before the Judicial Committee, the Justice Committee, rather, will remember that he talked about the things he doesn't fear for his country, and he talked about how SNC-Lavalin had been blown out of proportion. And then he said, "I am afraid for some things for the future of my country." And one of them that he talked about was election interference. And as Clerk of the Privy Council, he's a member of a small, newly created unit called the Critical Election Incident Public Protocol Team. There's about half a dozen members. And these are the people who are tasked with monitoring the election, looking for and reporting on foreign interference, which he clearly believes is a major threat. And he's acknowledging in this letter that it would be difficult for him, given the concerns around him, the allegations that he's a partisan, to come back and report that there has been interference of some kind by a foreign power in support of some Canadian political party, that this, one can imagine, might create a situation like that of the United States, where you have non-partisan agencies reporting on election interference and politicians then, saying we don't believe them or that they're motivated by partisan purposes. So he appears also in his letter to be referring to that. And I should add as one final note on this retirement resignation that we are told the Prime Minister's office did not request this resignation. This is Michael Wernick's doing. He is choosing the moment and the means and the method of his own departure.
And that wasn't the only announcement today. The Prime Minister, Evan, also announced a, quote, special examination related to the SNC-Lavalin controversy, and that was met with some opposition as well. Tell us about that.
That's right. That came as a surprise announcement during question period today, where the Prime Minister stood up and said that he will invite former Justice Minister and Attorney General Anne McClellan, who many will remember from the Jean Chrétien days, to conduct an internal, independent was the word he used, investigation into the back and forth between his office and the office of former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould and also other members of Cabinet. And this will run in parallel to the investigation being carried out by the Ethics Commissioner, also in parallel to the work being done by the Justice Committee. But it was met, as you say, with some, we might even say derision, actually, by members of the opposition, who pointed out that in addition to being a former Attorney General, Anne McClellan is also a lifelong Liberal. So let's have a look at that reaction from Andrew Scheer, Leader of the Opposition.
Well, there you have it, Mr. Speaker. Liberals will investigate Liberals to get to the bottom of this affair.
As former Minister of Justice and Attorney General and Deputy Prime Minister. She is uniquely suited for this role. Her work will be another important step towards maintaining Canadians' confidence in their institutions.
So there you go, Vashi. That was obviously not seen as a truly independent appointment by the opposition there, but we should point out that one appointment does seem to be probably more successful, and that is the person who will replace Michael Wernick, another career public servant. Ian Shugart will be taking his place. He's also a lifelong public servant, something like 41 years, but his career actually also includes some time as a political staffer for the Conservative Party. So that undoubtedly the government will be hoping would diffuse any potential claims of partisanship in his case. And in fact, we're already seeing one prominent Canadian Conservative, Jason Kenney, tweeting congratulations to Ian Shugart, calling him an outstanding public servant. So I guess 1 out of 2 are going over well with the opposition.
All right, thank you for that update, Evan. The CBC's Evan Dyer for us. So why did the government hire Anne McClellan for this job, and how is the opposition reacting to Michael Wernick's departure? And oh yeah, there's that budget tomorrow. Jennifer O'Connell is the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Finance. Pierre Poilievre is the Conservative finance critic, and Peter Julian is the NDP's finance critic, and they're all with me in studio now. Hi, very nice to see all three of you. I appreciate your time today. Ms. O'Connell, I'm going to have to start with you, and I'm going to have to start on the announcement from Michael Wernick today. Can you just, for the record, tell us, did the Prime Minister or anyone in his office ask for Mr. Wernick to resign?
No, as it was stated just now, Mr. Wernick made this decision. In his letter, and I point to his retirement letter, he stated the fact that as a public servant, he, and some of the issues that have been going on with opposition leaders, he felt it best that as a public servant, he needs to be neutral and not be involved in partisan activities. And given some of the interactions with opposition members, he felt it best to retire after a 38-year-long career.
Do you think he was too partisan? Do you think he should have resigned?
No, in terms of the testimony that I saw and I witnessed, I think it was Mr. Wernick's accounts of conversations he had. I think it was also spoken about in terms of his concerns about the upcoming election.
You don't think that was inappropriate given the role he would have in alerting the public about potential foreign interference?
No, but I think that's critically the point, that this is an area of concern and worry that needs to be top of mind to Canadians in terms of ensuring our democracy is protected. We've seen instances around the world, and I think as a public servant, he's probably seen a lot, and this is an area of concern.
What he said, though, was that he has top national security clearance, and then he went on to say he's raising an alarm. If he was not being too partisan, and there were many other comments that he made, why would he resign?
Well, I think his letter stated clearly that he felt that the mutual respect between opposition parties was no longer there. And
I just want to be clear. Is your interpretation then that he's blaming the opposition parties for his inability to do the work, or is he taking some responsibility for the way in which he communicated and the sort of partisan nature, alleged partisan nature of those words?
I can't possibly know what was in Mr. Wernick's mind, and I haven't spoken to him, but my take of the letter was that this office needs to be held in a nonpartisan way, and he felt it would be best for the country to move forward. And with the election coming up, again, he is nearing retirement, and I think he felt that it was best to move on and retire after a dignified career.
Mr. Poilievre, Mr. Wernick had a long history in the public service, including under other prime ministers, not just this one. 38 years, he participated in the transition exercises, the swearing in, and the first cabinet meetings of Prime Ministers Martin, Harper, and Trudeau. I know he was Deputy Minister of Indian Affairs, the Department of Indian Affairs, under Prime Minister Harper. Was there any effort on the part of the leadership of your party to acknowledge that you weren't comfortable with the way that he testified before the committee, the comments that he made, but try and find some kind of solution so that the federal election could proceed in the manner that all parties anticipated and hoped?
Like what?
Like, I don't know, reaching out to him, talking it out, trying to come to a solution other than him resigning.
I think he resigned because the Prime Minister turned the office of the Clerk of the Privy Council into a partisan role. He did that not only with the testimony he had Mr. Wernick deliver before committee, but Mr. Trudeau did that by trying to implicate the Clerk of the Privy Council in the whole SNC-Lavalin DPA affair from the very beginning. I mean, we know that the decision of the Attorney General to grant or reject a remediation agreement to a corporation charged with corruption should have been hers and hers alone, but by the Prime Minister insisting on everyone around him, badgering her, hounding her, issuing what she called veiled threats to her, he put Mr. Wernick in this position, and this resignation is partly his scandal.
To be fair, though, Mr. Wernick denied making those threats very clearly. He could not recollect every part of that conversation, but he denied making threats. And are you saying that essentially the Prime Minister told him to say those things? Because he seemed to be saying them, or at least insist that it was of his own volition.
I mean, Jody Wilson-Raybould has said that the pressure started with the Prime Minister. He's the one who interfered. He's the one who had his team hound her, and he is the one who led the government, whose actions she compared to the Saturday Night Massacre, a reference to Richard Nixon's Watergate firings. So this is all more reason why we need to hear from her again. Tomorrow morning, the Justice Committee will meet and decide whether to recall Jody Wilson-Raybould to complete her unfinished testimony. You'll recall she was not allowed to tell the whole story last time. She still has about a month of the scandal that she has been forced to stay secret on.
Well, that's her interpretation. Others have a different interpretation.
Well, then let's just invite her back and make it clear that she can speak, and then everybody's interpretation will be the same, and she can tell us then why she resigned.
Mr. Julian, on the same point, the idea of Mr. Wernick's sort of long history in the public service, did he have to resign? Was there another way around this that he could have stayed on?
Well, I think this is the fourth departure, as you pointed out, in 5 weeks. Since the scandal broke, we've had a cabinet shuffle every week, and we've had a major resignation or retirement every week. I mean, what that shows is there's an extent of the scandal that we have still yet to get to the bottom of. And what I find very perturbing, we have Jagmeet Singh's very honest and straightforward call for a public inquiry. Liberals are refusing that. I was in the room last week when the Justice Committee met for 20 minutes, and the Liberals shut down the motion to bring Ms. Wilson-Raybould back to the committee, which is something she's expressed that she would like to do, so that Canadians can find out exactly what happened in this appalling scandal. And I just don't think stonewalling, which is what the Liberals have done so far, is going to work for them. We've seen many departures now, and we're up to 4. We've seen many cabinet shuffles. The government's in chaos.
They'll say, though, we've heard from Jody Wilson-Raybould at length. We allowed her to testify for longer than normal. We've heard from Jerry Butts. Isn't that enough?
Spin.
That's what they would say.
That's political spin, because if you'd ask regular Canadians, including in my area, New Westminster, Burnaby, and perhaps we're more seized with this because Ms. Wilson-Raybould is riding just next door. People in British Columbia feel very acutely about this, and they would say, let her speak, let her come forward, take off the handcuffs and allow her to give her full testimony, because that's the only way Canadians are going to hear the truth about this appalling scandal.
Ms. O'Connell, there is one sort of quote-unquote investigation that your government announced today, but it's led by Anne McClellan. And I know she has a long list of credentials, but would you agree the optics of having a partisan investigating outstanding questions surrounding this issue are not good for your party or your government?
Well, I think we should clarify what Ms. McClellan is looking at, and it's about an advisory role to provide advice on the question of whether Attorney General or the Minister of Justice should be two separate
I thought she's
roles.
also looking at some of the interactions, though, between an Attorney General and Cabinet, and that would lend itself to the controversy at hand.
Right, but as a moving forward point in terms of advising the government, the Prime Minister had said that given the situation, that it was something he wanted to look at. It was something that I know the Justice Committee had talked about as well, and that her role is really to provide advice moving forward for the government to consider in relation to those two roles, Attorney General and Minister of
Was there
Justice.
someone, though, less partisan? I mean, up until she accepted this position, she was headlining a fundraiser at the end of March. Is that truly optically? I mean, I know that what your government's going to argue, and I know she has a long list of credentials, but the optics of that in the middle of all this, doesn't that strike you as problematic?
Well, that's fair. She won't be attending that fundraiser given this new appointment.
Yeah, up until the appointment, yeah.
But I mean, in fairness, this is a question that's been raised, and the government is seized with it. Canadians are thinking about it, talking about it, and the government's acting with somebody who has credentials that are unique. Let's be honest, there are not very many former Attorney Generals, Deputy Prime Ministers, and getting that advice on the real functions of government will be important. but I'm sure the government's going to also consider experts and take advice from others. And so, of course, we see the political optics or the connections, but this is an advisory role on the unique nature of those roles that she can help and advise the government with.
Mr. Poilievre, does Ms. McClellan, aside from her partisan leanings, have a role to play here, given her history, her experience as someone who has played both roles of Attorney General, Minister of Justice? She's been Deputy Prime Minister.
No, she's a Liberal partisan. What we need is for Jody Wilson-Raybould to have the gag order removed so that she can come back and complete her testimony. Let me illustrate what was wrong with the gag order at the last appearance. Lisa Raitt, can you tell us what was discussed with the Cabinet on February 19th? I cannot. Can you tell us what you discussed with the Prime Minister at meetings in Vancouver on February 11th? I cannot. Can you tell us why you resigned from Cabinet? I cannot. Would you be willing to return to this committee and give us testimony again? I would be. And the reason she does need to be is so that she can complete all of the facts and let Canadians know why she resigned.
But doesn't she need
Cabinet.
A full waiver before she can actually, you know what I'm saying? Like, I know that you're saying bring her back, but at this point, her interpretation, based we can assume on legal advice she's receiving, is that she can't talk about that.
And that's an easy problem. You've got a pen there, lend it to the Prime Minister, he'll sign the waiver, and away you go. That is entirely in his hands.
But could it be possible that her interpretation is too narrow? If we see Jerry Butts, for example, talking at length about that period, is it possible that she is making that decision herself not to talk about that?
That's a double standard again, right? Gerald Butts and Michael Wernick were allowed to talk about that period. She thus far has not been. All Trudeau has to do, if he believes she's allowed, is to put it on pen to paper and say so, and send his members to committee tomorrow and vote to bring her back. Because right now, he has a choice. Either tomorrow he will let her speak, or he will cover it up.
Mr. Julian, is it that binary of a choice? I mean, if, for example, Jerry Butts has been talking at length about that period, could it be that the Prime Minister's interpretation was that it applied to her time after she was Attorney General?
Jody Wilson-Raybould is a very credible witness. I was there in the room with the Justice Committee when she spoke. And I think for most Canadians, she's very credible. She goes by the book. That is why she suffered the consequences of losing her job, was because she stood up to procedural fairness. And so if she says that she is muzzled, then I believe her. And
she hasn't said she's muzzled. To be fair, she said that she can't talk about that.
She cannot talk about that. That means, in a sense, she is saying that she is unable to speak about that. She's being muzzled by the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister should allow that muzzle to be taken off so that she can actually speak clearly about what happened. And I think Canadians want to get to the bottom of this. What we're seeing is a government that is stonewalling, and the announcement of Anne McClellan doesn't change the perspective that people have, that this seems to be the Liberal Party and the Liberal government defending itself rather than trying to be transparent and to get out and let the public know exactly what transpired.
I'm unfortunately running out of time, but I do want to get each of you to comment for 10 seconds each on what you're looking for tomorrow in the budget, because that is a big event that's happening tomorrow. You're all finance critics, so really quickly, one thing each. Ms. O'Connell, what are you looking for?
I'm really excited about the budget tomorrow. Obviously, I think Canadians can expect that we're going to continue on our path to invest in Canadians, grow the economy. The Minister has highlighted a few areas. Certainly, a role I've been involved in is youth economic opportunities and millennials concerned about their economic future. So I'm really excited to see our government move forward in next steps.
Mr. Poilievre, what will you be looking for?
Well, I think you'll see the old Liberal three-step, which is massive scandal, massive spending to cover it up, and then, of course, massive tax increases after the election to pay for it all.
Okay, that was under 10 seconds. Thank you. Mr. Julian.
We are in an affordability crisis in housing. The Liberal government over 4 years will have built 14,000 units when hundreds of thousands of Canadian families are impacted. We need serious investments in affordable housing now to address this crisis that hits Indigenous communities and whole regions like Vancouver and Toronto and so many Canadian families.
All right, thank you all three of you for coming tonight. I'm sure we'll be checking in with you tomorrow. Appreciate your time this evening. Thanks to Jennifer O'Connell, Pierre Poilievre, and Peter Julian.
I worry about my country right now. I'm deeply concerned about my country right now. I worry about foreign interference.
So the Prime Minister's top advisor has resigned. His Attorney General has resigned. His Treasury Board President has resigned. And now the head of the entire public service has resigned. No one did anything wrong, but everybody's resigning for it.
Another high-profile government departure today. Privy Council Clerk Michael Wernick says he'll retire before the next election. That happened just minutes before Justin Trudeau announced in the House of Commons that Anne McClellan will be back on the federal scene. The former Liberal cabinet minister will look into the relationship between the government, its staffers, and the Attorney General. And before all of that happened, early this morning, Joyce Murray was appointed president of the Treasury Board. Still with me? So much news, but not too much for the power panel to handle. In Toronto, Andrew Thompson, former Saskatchewan Finance Minister, now Chief of Government Relations for the University of Toronto. Yolande James, former Quebec Liberal Cabinet Minister, is with us from Montreal. And here with me in studio, former Director of Policy to Stephen Harper, Rachel Curran, now with Harper and Associates, and the CBC's very own John Paul Tasker. Hi, everyone.
Hey, Vash.
Nice to see you. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Busy news day. JP, I'll start with you because I guess what everyone's sort of thinking about right now is what is the larger impact of this resignation? I know that he says that Mr. Wernick says he was retiring, but he had some very specific words for, I guess, the opposition or in general in his resignation letter that point very directly at what's ensued over the last month with SNC.
Well, clearly his relationship with the opposition parties is in such tatters that he can't even stay on to lead a transition in the event that Andrew Scheer or Jagmeet Singh actually win in the fall. That says something about how low these things have gotten between the two, because the nonpartisan office of the Clerk of the Privy Council should really be above all the partisan activities, but there's been such mudslinging between the two sides at the two committees that he's been at. He's really had to defend himself vigorously against accusations that he's basically doing the bidding of the Prime Minister and the Liberal Party. I think that it was the only option for him, frankly. I think that his days were limited. I didn't expect him to go so early in this whole affair. I thought he would actually see it out to maybe its natural conclusion. But to leave now, I guess, he's setting it up for the next clerk to come over and take the reins of a really important file, which is actually protecting this country against intrusions in our democratic system in the next election. That's really been a priority file for Michael Wernick. He felt he couldn't even do that because there would be accusations against him that he was acting in a partisan way if there were foreign incursions in the system of the electoral system this fall.
Yolande, do you think Mr. Wernick had any other choice but to leave, given the criticism around his testimony in front of the Justice Committee?
No, I mean, I think that his letter was quite explicit and on point with his read, and I agree with him on his read of the situation. Where I disagree with John Paul is that I actually expected this decision to come down the pipe earlier than today. I mean, there's in politics and as a top civil service, when you think about it, to the common person, aside from us who are really into, obviously, what happens in the political world, most people don't know the name of the Privy Council clerk by name, and there's a reason for that. This is usually a person that is very obviously important in a government, but obviously is a role that's normally played in the shadows. And his need, and I understand that, to have to defend himself with respect to the allegations, expose that, and kind of obviously made it such that him being able to continue to play his important role and be able to be operational with respect to any government, regardless of political affiliation in place, became compromised. And so my shock was that this actually happened today. I would have thought that given the 2-week break, that this was something that would have been announced earlier on.
Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was announced today because there's a real effort underway to change the channel on the Trudeau government's part. So this is clearly part of a strategy. Ditch the clerk because he's become a liability, appoint a new clerk, put Anne McClellan in place to do a independent review of the role of the Justice Minister and Attorney General, and tomorrow, on Budget Day, roll out a whole bunch of new spending and hope Canadians are distracted by that. And that
Wouldn't any government really in the face of a scandal be doing something similar?
I mean,
not to say it's right or wrong, but
yeah. Well, listen, this is crisis management 101. Like, you try and distract people by whatever means possible. And so I'm not surprised that the resignation, and let's be clear, this wasn't an entirely voluntary resignation of the clerk, is coming at this point because this is the week in which the Trudeau government is really trying to change the channel. And look, the clerk, it was, I think, poor form to blame the opposition parties for his resignation. The reason for his resignation was clearly the pretty disastrous testimony he gave before the Justice Committee. And that, I think, is on him. He could have chosen to do that differently. It was overtly partisan. I think it raised a lot of questions about whether the public service was truly independent, and I think it did a real disservice to our system of government and to the country. And so it was appropriate that he resign. I think that was aligned with the budget this week, with the appointment of Anne McClellan, because this is part of a political crisis management strategy.
In the Prime Minister's office, Andrew says that they didn't ask Mr. Wernick to resign, to be fair. Do you think if this is the strategy to sort of pile on with other news, that it will change the channel?
Well, this has been a saga that's been happening like a car crash in slow motion, and it seems like the rescue is going very much that same direction. What I found interesting about the announcements today, the series of them, is that they send very specific messages to core audiences that this government needs to speak to. The appointment of Joyce Murray as the Treasury Board Secretary, first of all, I think is a good appointment. She should be good in that portfolio. But it's also a very important signal to the Liberal caucus that there is still room for dissenting voices in that cabinet. She's not seen as a loyalist. This is an opportunity to kind of point to there's always being a way back into the Prime Minister's favor. Very much the same with Michael Wernick. I think people had expected that we would have seen something maybe 10 days ago when the Prime Minister was doing his what was expected to be a mea culpa, but wasn't. More of a eua culpa, I guess, that he delivered in the press gallery. But, you know, this was set in motion at this point. The message he's sending here with Michael Wernick's departure, and I think very significantly with Ian Shugart's appointment. Ian is a highly regarded civil servant, very capable, and really, I think is going to be able to be pointed to as restoring that impartiality back into the civil service. So those are two very important audiences that I think he was sending signals to. The final one with Anne McClellan's appointment, I think is really a question of, they floated out this issue of should they separate the roles or not. What do you do with it now? I think he's just really using this as an appointment for her to come up with a report so we can kick it down the road and do nothing, which is probably the right response for it. This is a process in search of a problem.
Okay, and actually on that, so that what you're referring to is Anne McClellan, former Deputy Prime Minister, announced the announcement came in the middle of question period in the House of Commons. I want to play for you a bit of the exchange after that announcement. Take a listen.
I'm therefore announcing that the Honourable Anne McClellan will serve as Special Advisor to examine these questions and provide independent recommendations to us. As former Minister of Justice and Attorney General and Deputy Prime Minister, she is uniquely suited for this role. Her work will be another important step towards maintaining Canadians' confidence in their institutions.
Well, there you have it, Mr. Speaker. Liberals will investigate Liberals to get to the bottom of this affair. Maybe Sheila Copps wasn't available. Unbelievable, Mr. Speaker.
So JP obviously didn't go over well with the opposition.
Clearly.
Not too surprisingly, Ms. McClellan has an extensive, set of credentials, but even the MP Jennifer O'Connell, who we had on a little while ago in a panel, admitted that she understands the optics of it. She insisted that this is an advisory role, sort of tried to really qualify what she would be doing.
And the government's basically said this is not an overly partisan study. They're looking at splitting up the Attorney General and Justice Minister roles. It's something that she knows very well about because she was the former Justice Minister. But why would you pick a former Liberal minister to help rescue you from a scandal that has you embroiled in partisan accusations here? It doesn't make any sense to me, frankly. She was scheduled to be the keynote speaker at a Liberal fundraising event in Edmonton at the end of the month. They had to quickly cancel that, of course, after she
The party is quick to say that fundraiser is for a group that helps more women get involved in politics, and that she canceled.
It's the Judy LaMarche Fund, which is named after a former Liberal cabinet minister, and it's really to support Liberal women who are running for politics. So I think it's an odd choice, frankly, when you're trying to change the channels, try and turn off the opposition attacking you on partisan grounds, to appoint a former Liberal minister to help you do that.